Mobile-friendly and responsive design. In this video, we're going to talk about media queries and how they can be used to change the styles based off of device or the size, mobile-first design principles, consideration for different devices, and UX considerations. UX stands for user experience. Media queries. Media queries are a unique way for you to adjust the styles and the way that your page displays based off of the size of either the device or the browser within. So here I have an example website, very simple. So we have a header, we have some content, we have some things in a box. As I make this smaller, so here's the first thing. So let's take the large monitor as being desktop. So then as things get smaller, you're more a tablet. So in a tablet-friendly way, this becomes 50%, or this width reduces. And now we have things styled in 3. And then if you continue down to a mobile size browser, as you see, things become full width. Now I kept the styles fairly simple, so my header is kind of butting up against here. This isn't the most pretty page, but the goal was to show what different responsive designs would look like. Before we dive into code, I want to talk a little bit about how media queries can be something fairly simple or something fairly complex. On the mozilla.org website, there's some really great documentation, and I'll leave a link to this. And here it talks about how you can use media queries for all types of screens, for print, which is any paged material or items viewed in like a print preview mode. You can have a screen, which is things identified for screen, or speech. I know I've talked a lot about accessibility, and it really is important that you do your best to make your websites and anything that you build truly accessible so that anyone can utilize it. So speeches, you can actually define CSS for speech synthesizers. Additionally, here's all the properties you can use as filters. So you can have width, height, aspect ratio, orientation. Orientation is a landscape or portrait. When you think of a desktop, pretty much everything is landscape. But when you're holding a phone, there are, a lot of times you hold your phone in portrait mode, but then you'll switch to landscape for video, and some websites, you really want to think about that, and that is one of the filters. You can talk about resolution. And then you get into some of the more complex things. I'm not going to go into detail on these complex attributes, but I want to just show you that they're here so that you know what is capable, and you know that, hey, if I do have this weird situation, or I'm developing for a device that only has 2 different colors, or I'm developing for, something unique, you can kind of know, hey, I have the ability to filter on that. So there's different display modes. If it's monochrome, if it's inverted colors means that the operating system or the browser has said invert the colors. So instead of this being a white background with black text, it would be a black background with white text. So you have hover, you have scripting, device width, device height, device aspect ratio. And as you see here, this says deprecated in media queries level 4. Really what you want, instead of using device width, is you want to just use width, height, and aspect ratio. And just to explain a little bit about that, so this is device, and device means the actual device itself. So think, for example, if you've got a desktop, your device width would be the actual width of your monitor. But as you know, you can have your browser, which is usually, a lot of people do things not full screen anymore. So you'd be basing it off a large screen, even though technically the browser window could be small, and that's why that's being removed. So you have your standard logical operators. You can use and not, only, and a comma. And you're targeting media types, you're targeting features. So this will go into great depth about how all of these different properties work and how you can use them. We're going to just cover basics and intro. So going back here, so here is our major responsive elements. We have these 3 items here. And then I've got a little message here. So this message here says will display only on a large screen. So right now, as you see, my browser is large and this displays. And if I go small and scroll down, it says this only displays on a small screen. So this shown, I'm going to zoom in a little bit so it'll be somewhat easier to read. But as you see, when you do things like zooming, it actually affects the way the page is designed and looks. So right now, even though I'm on a full width browser, it is showing as if it was tablet sized because I'm zoomed in. So if I zoom out, my viewport has more pixels. And if you hit Control 0, you go to standard. So this is no zoom at all. So this is what this website would look like if I was not zoomed in. So I'll zoom in a little bit, 133. And let's dive into the code. We have our standard header that we've been including everywhere, and I have included responsive style.css. So this is a style sheet designed just for this page. I have my body, a section, and in my section I have my h1 tag, I have a paragraph tag, and then I have a division, a div, with a class of feature options, and then a bunch of divs inside that are a feature. Let's think of this as a product grid or anything else. And then inside I have a header level 3 and then an unordered list. And all of these are going to keep the basic default HTML stylings. And really all I'll be worrying about is the feature. And then down at the bottom, I have a class small hidden and small visible, and that'll show how you can show and hide. This is useful if you have, a special feature that doesn't work on mobile or works better on mobile. You can show that, or even, if you think of navigation, it'll allow you to have a different navigation for mobile versus desktop. And I'll get into in the next video a little bit why that's important. Going over to the CSS. So my CSS, this is a total of 49 lines for that entire page. So I have my section, and my section, I set my width to 95%. And the reason for this is that way my content won't fill the entire browser, so it'll have a little spacing on the left and the right. I gave a max width of 840. There are some people who use extremely large browsers and extremely large monitors, and if you take an entire line of text and span that across so much, it just becomes daunting and large, and the eye can't go from one line to the next. So sometimes you want to restrict the width of content. Then I have 2 lines here, margin left auto and margin right auto. This is how you center an object that is block or inline block. By doing this, what it says automatically set my left and right margins to the same value, which is how you center something. So there's no easy way to center other than this. And it's one of those things that if you dig really deep into why it works, it's fairly complex, but it's really only just 2 lines of code, so you can copy and paste it and it'll just work. So then we have our feature options. So our feature option, I set a max width of 720 pixels, and again, margin left and right auto. If we go back in here, so we have our section, and in our section was the feature options, and in this was the features. This way, I'm going to have yet additional padding on the feature options. Then we have our feature. So our feature is display inline block, and that means that each item will have a height and a width and its margin, but it will also be inline, which means you'll have one item, then the next item, and then the next item, and they will flow as if they were text. So you'll have one line, and then another line, and then another line. My width is 30%, so it's going to be 30% of the container. So that means, since it's 30%, 3 items will fit in a single block, and that'll be 90% width. I gave it a border, a 2-pixel solid border of gray, a border radius of 5 pixels. I gave it a margin of 8 pixels to kind of give it some spacing, and then vertical align top. So when you have items that are of different sizes, when you take text is all essentially the same size. It's all got the same top and the same bottom, so everything aligns. But when you have items that are different height and weight, if I go back, so here I have items that are different height and weight. So this one is tall down to here, this one is to here, and this one's to here. So if I vertically align them to the top, that means the line is going to be in the top. So they're going to be lined up in the top. Another vertical align I could have is middle, which would mean that they would all center on each other. So this one would move down into the middle a bit, and I could have vertical align bottom. And bottom would take this, this, and this, and all make them together, so they would vertically align on the bottom. So that's what the vertical align is. So up to this point, I haven't talked about media queries, but let's just quickly talk about the styles as they represent now. I made my entire section 90% width, but with a maximum width. So the maximum width is hit, so that's why you're seeing all this extra. In here, this is a smaller box, so I have some extra padding there. Then I have each of these, which have their border radius and the border. They have an 8-pixel margin, which means these should be about 16 pixels apart. And they have a width of about 30% of their container. So the container is about this big, and each of them have a width of 30%. So all of this makes sense and is logical. We have our small visible. So small visible, we have display none. We'll talk about that when we kind of get down to there. So now we get into our media queries. So a media query is similar to a selector, but it's on top of a selector. So here it starts with @media, and then you have here your query. So in this case, we have min device width, and max device width. So if I get rid of this and just say min width and max width, this should remain the same. And that would affect our tablet view. So if I go to tablet, say yeah. So everything's still fine. Now, I was using the old deprecated device width, which was fine and it worked, but since it's deprecated, we shouldn't be using it, which is why I changed it. So you will see that, especially in some copy and paste code, if you're looking on how to do something specific. You'll see min device width and max device width, and you're completely welcome to use it, but I recommend you changing it to just be min width and max width. So here we're using @media, and then saying a minimum width of 768 pixels and a max width of 1024 pixels. And in this case, now we're applying a new style. So for the class feature, we're going to add width. Now, if you remember from a previous video, we talked about cascading. So even though width was defined here as 30%, since it is defined here later in the document, this condition is met, this will overwrite that previous property. So instead of being 30%, it's going to be 46%. Now, I didn't use 50% because we also have to factor in margin, and the margin is going to add additional size to this. So if I did 50%, if you did 50% plus the margin, it would overflow. So here is one of those places where using a CSS framework takes a lot of math out of things, and I find that a lot easier to use. But I want to show this because this is also significantly smaller and it doesn't use a framework, so you can use it anywhere. Between 768 pixels and 1024 pixels is what you would consider a tablet screen size. Now, how do I know that? The answer is you just search for it. If you search, you'll find a bunch of pre-made media queries for different sets of devices. If you want to look up every single pixel width for different devices, you can, and you can match that exactly. But this pretty much will cover all tablets, or at least smaller based browsers. So we had this exact code copied below, because I wanted to show the difference between min device width and min width. But since min device width has been deprecated, and I changed this, I just kind of got rid of that duplicate code. So that's where it went. So we have our media max width is 768. So pretty much what we're doing is saying, this is our default styling, which will display for all large browsers. Then for medium size, so for tablet size browsers, we're going to show this set of CSS. And for small browsers, we are going to apply these. Now, because of the way CSS works, we don't need to redefine all of these properties. So if I have a coloring up here, for example, this border, I don't have to redefine it. I only have to define what changes. So in this case, for the small browsers and phones, I say small hidden, display none. So that means take this item and don't display it. Don't give it any height, don't give it any width, any margin. So remove it from the display. Then I'm going to take small visible and make it display block. So previously I glanced over the small visible. So small visible, we want it only to be visible on a small screen, which means on all other screens we need it not to display. So that's why here under the general CSS, I have it display none. So if we are on a small screen, we do want a display block. And the last thing is their feature is going to be width 100%, margin 0. So I don't want to add any margin left or right because we don't need that. And then margin bottom 8. So margin bottom, because things are going to be on top of each other, we want to add that. So now that we've looked at the CSS, let's go back and just do a quick look. So on a big screen, you have 30% width with some margin left and right, and everything is displaying like that. As we go down to a smaller tablet-friendly size, we now have 46% width with a little bit of room between. And then we go all the way down to a phone size, and things are 100% width down here. And this only displays on a small screen. As we pop to the tablet screen, so 768 pixels, this will only display on a large screen.